Commander Raina Patel stood at the observation deck of the TSS Nightingale, her weathered hands pressed against the reinforced glass as she watched the distant stars blur past. 27 years of deep space service had left their mark. Silver threads through her dark hair, lines etched around her eyes. But nothing had prepared her for what waited at the edge of charted space. The Galactic Council's emergency broadcast had reached them 3 days ago. Station Omega-7, one of the oldest monitoring outposts maintained by the Archean species, had gone dark after transmitting a signal pattern never before recorded in the Council's million-year history. The Archeans, despite their advanced technology and centuries of space exploration, had refused to investigate. So had the Melvordians and the Quantum Collective. That left humanity, the youngest, most reckless species in the Council, to answer the call. Commander. First Officer Jakub Novik's voice broke through her thoughts. Engineering reports the quantum drive is holding steady at 97% efficiency. We're the first vessel to maintain these speeds this far out. Raina nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Human engineering. Improvised, unorthodox, and somehow more effective than it had any right to be. The Archeans still couldn't figure out how their primitive modifications worked so well. "Any word from Dr. Ishikawa?" she asked, turning to face her XO. The ship's xenorchaeologist had been analyzing the signal pattern since they received it. "That's actually why I'm here," Jakub replied, his expression tightening. "She's requesting your presence in the lab. Says she's found something in the pattern that shouldn't be possible." The walk to the research lab took them through the ship's central corridor, where crew members from a dozen nations worked alongside the handful of alien specialists who'd volunteered for the mission. The Nightingale represented the best of humanity, not just their technology and courage, but their ability to unite in the face of the unknown. Dr. Yuki Ishikawa barely looked up when they entered, her attention fixed on the holographic display floating above her workstation. The signal pattern twisted through the air like a living thing, its complexity far beyond anything Raina had seen before. "It's not just a signal," Yuki said without preamble. "It's a key, and it's written in human DNA sequences." Raina felt the air leave her lungs. "That's impossible. Omega-7 was built before humanity joined the Council, before we left our solar system." "Exactly." Yuki finally looked up, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Which means either someone knew we were coming centuries before we arrived, or time isn't moving the way we think it is out here," Jakub finished, voicing the impossible thought. The lab's sensors chose that moment to scream to life. Raina rushed to the nearest terminal, her heart pounding as data streamed across the screen. The void ahead of them was changing, space itself seeming to fold and ripple. "All hands, battle stations," she commanded through the ship-wide comm. "Prepare for temporal anomalies. This is not a drill." Through the lab's viewport, she watched as reality twisted, revealing the massive form of Station Omega-7. But it wasn't the abandoned outpost they'd expected to find. Light blazed from every window, and ships of unknown design swarmed around it like angry insects. "Those vessels," Yuki whispered, scanning them with trembling hands. "Their hull configurations, their human designs, Commander, but they're centuries ahead of anything we've developed." Raina's tactical training kicked in as she processed the implications. They hadn't just found a mystery. They'd stumbled into humanity's future, or perhaps its past. The distinction didn't seem to matter anymore. "Send a message to the Council," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before them. "Tell them we found something that changes everything we thought we knew about human history, and warn them." She paused, watching as one of the future ships turned toward them. "Warn them that we're about to make first contact with ourselves." The Nightingale's sensors registered a transmission from the station, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The message was brief, encoded in the same DNA sequences they detected earlier, but this time Raina understood its meaning immediately. "Welcome home," it read. "We've been waiting for you to catch up. As alerts blared and her crew rushed to battle stations, Reyna Patel realized that humanity's greatest adventure, and perhaps its greatest test, was just beginning. The legends of their species were about to be written across time itself, and she stood at the very edge of that story, ready to take the first step into an impossible future. The future ships surrounding Station Omega-7 moved with impossible grace, their hulls shimmering with an energy signature that made Reyna's eyes water. As First Officer Novak called out defensive positions, Dr. Ishikawa's voice cut through the controlled chaos of the bridge. "Commander, I'm detecting quantum signatures identical to our own engine core. Those ships, they're running on variations of our technology, but exponentially more advanced." Reyna's fingers tightened on her command chair. Multiple temporal signatures. At least 7 distinct time periods, maybe more. It's like someone gathered humanity's technological evolution and put it all in one place. The largest vessel, a behemoth that dwarfed the Nightingale, moved into position directly ahead of them. Its design seemed to defy physics, angles flowing into curves that shouldn't have been possible in normal space. "Incoming transmission," Lieutenant Hassan announced from communications. "You're not going to believe this, but it's using our own encryption protocols. Old ones, from the Mars colonies." "Put it through," Reyna ordered, straightening in her chair. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a face that made several bridge officers gasp. The woman looking back at them was Reyna Patel, or rather, a version of her perhaps 20 years older, her hair completely silver, her eyes holding the weight of decades more experience. "Try not to panic," the older Reyna said with a familiar half-smile. "This gets complicated enough without adding temporal paradox anxiety to the mix." Reyna found herself mirroring the expression. "I assume you remember being on this side of the conversation." "Vaguely. Time gets slippery out here. That's part of the problem. And the solution." The older version's expression hardened. "We don't have much time. The void consciousness is waking up, and this time we need to be ready." "The what?" "The reason Station Omega-7 was built. The reason humanity evolved the way we did. The reason we're all here." The transmission crackled with temporal interference. "Permission to come aboard. Some things need to be explained in person, and we need to coordinate across at least 5 different timelines to make this work." Before Reyna could respond, Dr. Ishikawa's instruments erupted in a cacophony of alarms. The space around Station Omega-7 began to ripple dark tendrils of something reaching out from behind the structure. Energy signature expanding exponentially, Yuki reported, her fingers flying over her console. "Whatever's generating it, it's operating on quantum and classical levels simultaneously. It's rewriting local spacetime." The older Reyna's image flickered. "They're early. Damn it, the temporal shockwave from your arrival must have accelerated the awakening. Transmitting coordinates now. Get your ship into position with the others. We're going to attempt a time-locked containment field." Reyna had commanded ships through impossible situations before, but coordinating with future versions of humanity to contain an ancient cosmic horror was definitely a first. Yet somehow, the absurdity of it all felt right. Of course, humanity would end up fighting a battle across time itself. "Helm, take us in. Dr. Ishikawa, I need you to coordinate with your counterparts on the other ships. If we're making history, let's at least try to keep it consistent." As the Nightingale moved into formation, Reyna watched the other vessels, each from a different point in human history, do the same. On her screens, she could see variations of her own crew working in perfect synchronization, despite being separated by decades or centuries of technological evolution. The void behind Station Omega-7 continued to grow, revealing glimpses of something vast and ancient. The Arctians had built this station as a prison, Reyna realized. They'd known what slept here, and they'd run when it showed signs of stirring. But humanity hadn't run. Instead, they'd gathered their past, present, and future to face it together. "All ships, prepare for temporal convergence," Reyna ordered, feeling the weight of every version of herself making the same command across time. Let's make sure we give ourselves a future worth fighting for. The quantum drives of a dozen ships, each from a different era of human advancement, spun up to maximum power. The energy readings exceeded anything their instruments could measure, reality itself groaning under the strain. The thing about humans, the older Reyna's voice carried across all frequencies, addressed as much to the ancient horror as to her crews, is that we don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win. The void consciousness struck again, but this time they were ready. As it reached through time to erase their past, every ship activated their temporal cores simultaneously. The resulting cascade of paradox energy fed back through the entity's own attack, trapping it in a loop of causality. "We're not just fighting it," Yuki shouted over the sound of reality tearing itself apart. "We're using its own nature against it. It exists outside of linear time, so we're forcing it to experience everything at once." Through the chaos, Reyna watched as the impossible became inevitable. The void consciousness, trapped in an endless moment of its own making, began to collapse in on itself. But the victory would come at a price. All ships showing critical temporal stress, Lieutenant Hassan reported. "We can't maintain this configuration much longer." "We don't need to." The older Reyna's voice was calm despite the destruction unfolding around them. "We just need to hold it long enough to complete the loop, to ensure we become what we need to be." The entity's death throes rippled through dimensions, each wave threatening to tear the assembled ships apart. But human engineering, stubborn and impossible and brilliant, held together just long enough. "Transmitting temporal encoding sequences now," Yuki announced, her fingers flying across her console, converting the quantum signature of the entity's death into genetic markers, matching them to the original signal. Completing the circle, Reyna finished, understanding at last. "We're not just winning this battle. We're making sure we'll always win it." The void consciousness collapsed into a singularity of compressed time, taking with it the knowledge that it had inadvertently created its own worst enemy. Humanity, encoded with the temporal resilience born from this very moment, would ensure its defeat across every possible timeline. As reality began to stabilize around them, Reyna looked to her older self's transmission. "What happens now?" The answer came with a familiar half-smile. "Now, Commander, we make sure the legend never rests. Not in this world, or the next." The aftermath of the temporal battle left the surviving ships scattered across a patchwork of partially rewritten timelines. The Nightingale's hull groaned with stress fractures that seemed to exist in multiple moments simultaneously, its corridors filled with crew members experiencing time at slightly different rates. "Temporal radiation levels are off the charts," Yuki reported, her voice echoing strangely as if speaking from several seconds in both the past and future. "The genetic encoding sequence was successful, but it's changing us, all of us." Reyna watched through the viewport as Station Omega-7 flickered between states of existence, its structure adapting to the new timeline they created. The future ships were beginning to fade, their crews evacuating to their own proper times before the temporal barriers fully reformed. "We did more than win a battle," her older self explained through a deteriorating comm channel. "We fundamentally altered what it means to be human. The temporal resistance we encoded into our DNA. It's going to change everything." The price of their victory became clear as reports flooded in from across the ship. Crew members were experiencing accelerated evolution, their consciousness expanding to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. The human brain, already remarkably adaptable, was restructuring itself to accommodate an awareness that stretched across time itself. "The Arctians knew," Jacob said, his eyes showing the same temporal depth that was affecting them all. "They built this station not just to trap the void consciousness, but to ensure humanity would find it at exactly the right moment. They saw what we could become." The older Reyna's image flickered one last time. "The hardest part comes next. Living with what we've done, what we've become." The galaxy isn't ready for humans who can step through time like walking through a door. We need to limit ourselves, at least for now. All ships, prepare for temporal synchronization. The older Reyna's voice echoed across all channels. The void consciousness destroyed 1,000 civilizations before the Arctians managed to trap it. It thinks in dimensions we can barely comprehend. But it never encountered humans before. It never faced a species that could punch through time itself just to pick a fight. The dark tendrils reached for the assembled ships, testing their defenses. Where they touched the hulls, reality itself seemed to fray. But human engineering held firm, reinforced by centuries of innovation compressed into a single moment. You know what the real difference is between humans and the other species. The older Reyna continued as they prepared for battle. They see time as a river, flowing in one direction. We see it as a resource, a tool, sometimes even a weapon. The void consciousness emerged fully from its prison, its form defying description, existing simultaneously across multiple planes of reality. Around it, the assembled human ships began to glow with accumulated temporal energy. Let's show this ancient horror why you don't underestimate the crazy apes from Earth, Reyna muttered, and gave the order to engage. The battle for time itself was about to begin, and humanity was fighting on all fronts at once. Time fractured around the Nightingale as the void consciousness struck. Reality splintered into 1,000 possible moments, each one showing a different version of destruction. But Reyna had seen impossible odds before, and humanity had a habit of turning them inside out. Multiple temporal incursions. Lieutenant Hassan's voice crackled with static. It's trying to erase us from different points in history simultaneously. Through the command viewport, Reyna watched as one of the future ships simply unraveled, its timeline deleted by the entity's attack. But instead of disappearing, the vessel's crew appeared on other ships across the formation. Transported by emergency temporal beacons, they'd apparently prepared for exactly this situation. Now we know why we built those redundancies into the evacuation protocols. The older Reyna's voice came through, heavy with grim satisfaction. Dr. Ishikawa, are you seeing what we're seeing? Yuki's hands danced across her instruments. The void consciousness. It's not just attacking our ships. It's attacking our entire evolutionary timeline, trying to prevent humanity from ever reaching space. But it's failing, Reyna realized, watching the data stream across her displays. Every time it erases a moment in our history, we adapt around it. Like we were designed to, her older self finished. Someone knew this was coming. They engineered humanity to be temporal cockroaches, impossible to erase completely from existence. The revelation hit Reyna like a physical blow. The DNA sequences in the original signal. They weren't just a message. They were a blueprint, Yuki breathed. Humanity's temporal resistance encoded into our genetic structure, by us. Using this moment, this battle, as the template. Another ship vanished from formation, its crew scattering across time to safety. The void consciousness roared in frequencies that shouldn't have existed, its frustration at humanity's resilience rippling through subspace. All ships, execute Protocol Omega. The older Reyna commanded, we're done playing defense. Time to show this thing why you don't make humanity your enemy. The assembled vessels began moving in perfect synchronization, their temporal wakes creating interference patterns in the fabric of reality. The Nightingale's engines screamed as they pushed beyond their design tolerances, but held together through sheer human stubbornness and engineering that defied conventional physics. We're not just fighting across space, Yuki explained, her eyes wide with understanding. We're creating a temporal resonance cascade, using our own timeline as a weapon. The void consciousness reacted violently, its attacks becoming more desperate as it sensed the trap closing. Entire sections of history flickered and rewrote themselves around them, but humanity's timeline remained stubbornly intact, protected by the very adaptations they were about to create. A voluntary regression, Reyna understood. Hide our true potential until the right moment. Until we need it again. Her older self confirmed. The knowledge will sleep in our genes, waiting. And when the time comes, we'll remember how to wake it up. The future ships vanished one by one, returning to their proper places in the timeline. But they left behind more than memories. They left a legacy encoded in the very essence of what it meant to be human. Part 5. Beyond the Stars. 5 years later, Commander Reyna Patel stood before the Galactic Council, her silver-streaked hair now completely white, her eyes holding depths that made even the ancient Arctians uncomfortable. The chamber was silent as she finished her report on the Battle of Station Omega-7, though she carefully omitted certain details about humanity's new temporal capabilities. The station has been decommissioned, she concluded, the threat contained. Humanity respectfully requests full membership in the Council, given our contribution to galactic security. The Arctian speaker's crystalline form shimmed with barely contained agitation. Your species has demonstrated, concerning levels of advancement, the genetic modifications you've undergone were necessary for survival, Reyna interrupted smoothly. Just as your own species once modified itself to achieve quantum consciousness, we are all products of evolution, Speaker. Humanity has simply accelerated the process. In the years since the battle, human expansion into the galaxy had proceeded with remarkable speed. Ships now carried temporal shielding as standard equipment, though most crews didn't understand the true purpose of these experimental systems. Research outposts studied phenomena that other species found impossible to approach. And deep in humanity's collective unconscious, the ability to perceive and manipulate time itself lay dormant, waiting. The Council recognizes humanity's service, the Speaker finally declared. Full membership is granted, with all rights and responsibilities therein. As the chamber erupted in the various sounds of approval unique to each species, Reyna felt the weight of time pressing against her consciousness. Somewhere in the future, she knew, another battle waited. Another moment when humanity would need to remember its true nature. But for now, they would play their role. The young, brash species that somehow managed to survive anything the galaxy threw at them. Let the other races wonder at their luck, their adaptability, their seemingly impossible resilience. The truth would remain encoded in their very beings, a secret written in quantum frequencies across every strand of human DNA. Later, in her quarters aboard the Nightingale II, Reyna reviewed the encrypted messages from the scattered few who remembered the full truth of what had happened. Dr. Ishikawa's research team had successfully masked the more obvious signs of temporal adaptation in the general population. The knowledge was safely dormant, preserved but hidden. Message from Station Deep Echo, her computer announced. Priority 1. The text was brief, but it made her smile. Another impossible phenomenon had been detected at the edge of known space. Another mystery that no other species dared to investigate. Another chance for humanity to prove that legends never truly rest. Plot a course, she ordered. Maximum speed. The Nightingale I's engines hummed to life, carrying her toward humanity's next great adventure. In her mind, she could feel the different timelines stretching out before her like branches of an infinite tree. Each one held its own dangers, its own challenges, its own moments when humanity would need to remember what they had become. But that was the thing about humans. They never just survived. They adapted. They evolved. They turned their greatest battles into their greatest strengths. And somewhere in the quantum fabric of spacetime, the echo of their victory at Station Omega-7 continued to ripple outward, ensuring that humanity would always be ready when the galaxy needed them most. The legend, after all, was just beginning.